Fragments of silicon, not recommended as an emergency nutrient supplement.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the Daylight Interviews. Joining us this week is Catalin Marceau of GrimTalin. Is it Talon or Talon?
GrimTalin, that is correct. Nice to be here, guys.
Indeed, it's nice to have you. Right, so how we like to get started is we like to get to know the persons behind the games, the studio, and all that jazz. And we do that by starting with this question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
All right, that's a loaded question. Well, I played games since I was very, very young. I think one of the first games I played was on a Sinclair Spectrum ZX clone from here in Eastern Europe called Synthes. I think one of the first games was a clone of Pitfall. And then when I was a bit older, I got a computer and I played a lot of a game called Supaplex. I don't know if you've heard of it. And that game was so fascinating to me. So I started to. Sorry?
Didn't say anything. Continue.
Okay, so I started to design my own levels on paper, and that was kind of like the inception of maybe I want to do this when I grow up. And then I kept, I got in touch with programming. I started to study how I could do that. I went to a high school specialized on computer science. Then I went to college again, computer science, and things just I just kind of followed my career path that I set for myself when I was about, I think, 10 years old or something like that.
And did you go to college for game programming or anything like that, or was that for coding, programming?
Yeah, it was general computer science. They didn't really have any curriculum related to game development. I think there was some class about 3D programming, but it was very archaic. So everything that I learned on the side. But as it was the habit here in Romania, where I'm from, you needed that college degree. So, that was the closest. So computer science was the closest thing I could go to, so I can follow my career path of becoming a game developer.
And how did you end up in the industry proper?
It was in my third year. I hope I remember correctly. Yeah, so I went with a scholarship in Spain for half a year. And then when I came back, my brother, which is almost 5 years older than me, actually opened a very tiny game development studio focused on mobile games here in my city. It was one of the only ones, if not the first one in the city, that did that. And I said, well, I want to join in. And, like a good brother that he is, he told me, well, you need to take an interview and a test and see if you can pass it. And yeah, so I did that. I passed it. I didn't have any problem. I was pretty good at programming and I wanted to join as a coder. And that's how I started. I just, I guess I was lucky to have a very easy entry, so to speak. There weren't a lot of coders in the city who had much idea about game development. So my study of game development as a hobby really came in handy. So, and then I stayed with that company, kind of built it together from a very tiny thing to something really successful. I stayed there for like 10 years. And then I decided I want to make indie games. So I've been making indie games for the last almost 6 years.
And are you the founder of GrimTalin?
Yes, GrimTalin is in fact a solo developer studio. It's just me. I make games. I make them either alone or I collaborate with various partners. As is the case with the last game that we announced, I worked with Darkania Works, which is another solo developer studio from here in my city. You know, indie developers are it's very common for indie developers to have solo studios or very tiny teams.
We are acquainted with this, like, as we have had many a solo dev on our program, like, from all over the world.
I can imagine.
Like, and how long have you been doing the indie game gig?
So it's almost 6 years. So the company was actually like the paperwork was done in January 2018. So it's almost six years officially. You know, if you want to get specific, it's more than 6 years because I started working before I made the paperwork for the company for my first game. But you know, let's just say 6 years.
I think that'll work out well enough. Nobody hears us is going to be a stickler for those details, to say the least. Anyway, as far as I can reckon, it looks like your first actual release was the Adventures of Alina Temple.
Yes, yes, that's right. I worked on that game before starting the company, and then when I got close enough to the finish line, I released it on itch.io at first in early access, and then on Steam, and then I got the dev kit for Nintendo Switch, and I made the port for Nintendo Switch, and that was really cool because the Steam launch was an absolute failure. I think I sold 7 units in my first day on Steam, which wasn't very encouraging for the start of my indie career. But then I released it on Switch, and it was really nice. There was a lot of interest for it. A lot of people from press and streamers and people in blogs and everything that got in touch and was like, "Oh, this game is really cool. Really happy that you brought it to Switch." So yeah, that really gave me a huge boost, and it did decently well financially too, so that it encouraged me to keep on this adventure. It's a crazy adventure, but I keep at it.
Indeed. Like, and that is a story that, once again, is not unfamiliar to these shores. um, at the very least, you have found a measure of success, or I'm assuming that your other games have done decently, since you're still on this beat.
Well, let's just say I'm also a very stubborn person. So luckily for me, before I started the indie adventure, like I said, we were pretty successful with our last company. So I had some money put aside for, rainy days. And that allowed me to keep on going enough so that the games, so enough so that I can give my games plenty of time to generate revenue. So I don't know, maybe other indie devs have a lot of success from the first month. It wasn't the case for me. It's more like, it's a long run, like 2-3 years, they generate some revenue, and then the numbers add up enough to consider them at least a decent business adventure.
At least from the people who have appeared on our program, your story is far more common. And honestly, sometimes it's not even that good, because we have we have some devs who never see success due to one factor or another. So it can be a harsh market out there.
Absolutely. And when I say success, that's very subjective. Like everybody says their own, goals. My goals, I mean, when I got into this indie stuff, I knew how difficult it is. So, like my goals are, to generate some revenue. It's never like I never managed to generate so far enough revenue to consider, well, now I'm earning a good salary. No, I haven't gotten there, but I've generated enough revenue to think I need to keep going if I'm hoping to one day get really good at this, like get really successful. Because the cases where indie developers are like successful from the first or second game, they're like 1 in 1,000 games released, right? So I'm realistic enough to know that I'm probably not going to be one of those immediately successful developers. So I need to just keep on going, keep on trying new things, so that I can one day find my own recipe for success.
It's a good ethos to have, and it sounds like you're in the position to, pursue that. Which, once again, not everybody is.
Absolutely, yeah. I know it's difficult, and like I said, I knew what I was getting into, and I knew that I needed to have some initial investment that was, decent enough to sustain me, like for at least, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years. And the lucky part was that every game that I made did manage to generate some revenue, and with that revenue, the period of time I can keep at it, keep going, has increased. So from 3-4 years, I'm probably gonna go to somewhere like 6-7 years, and then after 7 years, we'll need to see.
I mean, 7 years is honestly not that far off, according to your own timeline.
What?
Your company is 6 years old now, so
Yeah, that's a bit of foreshadowing, right? So it's like the game that we announced now. That might not be like exactly the last game, but it's definitely one of the last ones I make if I don't really hit something like a really good revenue generator.
concerning.
Or really
But
exciting. Depends how you want to look at it.
I mean, it can be both. Like, exhilaration often comes with fear. You Um. Anyway, so putting aside the financial considerations of the indie scene, we should probably get into the actual games a bit more here.
Yeah.
Indeed, I guess starting with Elena Temple, which is technically speaking a series,
Yeah.
because the game I really want to get to is the Fall of Elena Temple, because I think you are the first developer we've had on the program that's worked on the play date. So for those who might not know what the play date is, it's this, I hesitate to say a throwback console or a throwback handheld, but it's this primitive handheld that was put out a few years back by Panic. And the big, I suppose, gimmick about this is the only measure of input is a crank. I think maybe a button or two as well.
Yeah, it has a directional D-pad, right, and A/B buttons too.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what it's like making a game for such a, let's say, unique advice?
So before I made the game, so last year we released Last Days of Lazarus, which was a pretty long game. I think I stayed on it about a year and a half. And then prior to that, I had my puzzle, which I developed it for almost 2 years. And after Last Days of Lazarus, we started working on the Crimson Maid, which we just announced, and I developed that for about 9 months. So I was developing this, really big games, complex. It took a lot of time, and then I just felt like I needed a break. I needed to go back a little to my roots, to when I made the original Elena Temple, which was, this really retro, very simplistic, especially on the graphics side game. And I knew about the play date since before it launched, right? I was following this, and I kept checking the page for pre-ordering it, but they didn't ship to Romania, which was, I finally had to get it from eBay. It was my only solution. So I kept checking their community and, the status of their engine, their SDK, and I noticed they had this tiny web engine called Pulp, and you could make with it like kind of limited games. It was mostly focused on games that are reminiscent of Legend of Zelda, like the first one, the top-down Legend of Zelda, something like that. And I started to play around with it just because I needed a little break from all the, AAA graphics and Unreal Engine and all that. And I played with it for one day. Thought, hey, would it be interesting to make something like Elena Temple, but with this very limited engine for the Playdate, because the Playdate has monochrome graphics. Elena Temple, the original one, had monochrome graphics. Seemed like a good fit. And then after a day, I had a tiny prototype, but it was different from the original game, right? And then I spent it another day, and then I had like the basic mechanics of rewinding and falling, rewinding and collecting and everything. And I played with it for a little. I showed it to a couple of friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is really cool." I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a game. So I set myself, I'm gonna stay 3 weeks to design this game, and then another week to make all the marketing materials, for the release. And they were some pretty intense 3 weeks, but it was really fun because it really allowed me to like get back to the roots of game design, so you don't focus at all on visuals, right? Very simple pixel art, but then you try to make as cool game mechanics as possible with something very limited. Like even the programming is super limited, and you need to like think outside the box to implement some things that, with a regular programming language, they would be really basic. But here it was more like thinking outside the box to get the same result. So it was extremely fun to spend that time on the game.
And how much time did it take to create this?
To create the Fall of Elena Temple. So it was like 3 weeks, maybe 4. I don't remember exactly if I stayed on that self-imposed schedule of 3 weeks, but tops 4 weeks, and then like another week to prepare assets, make the trailer, promote it a little bit, and put it on itch.io first. And then after I released it, the response was really good. People were really excited about the game. I think the community on Playdate is probably very small. I have no idea exactly how big it is. Maybe active players, I don't know if there are like 10,000 maybe active players, maybe less. But seeing such a small community, be excited about my game, it was really nice. It was so I was really happy to have done this, and it's again, it's a little highlight in my career, which I'm very proud of.
Like, well, that's good. Did you end up using the crank for anything?
Yeah. So like the Fall of Elena Temple kind of looks like a platformer, and it more or less is a platformer, but like you can't jump, so you can only jump to get a coin that's right above you, but you can't jump from a platform to another. So like the game revolves around the concept that you need to fall. So there are like teleporters, for example. So you teleport on a platform from above, you fall, you collect everything, and then if you rewind the crank, it teleports you back to the last place where you fell from. And you have up to 5 slots of these rewinds, and as you fall, you can rewind up to 5 times, and then they become available again, the slots for rewinding. And it was a really cool mechanic. So like I said, I had this after 2 days of playing with that little engine. It was really nice, and after 2 days, I was like, "Ooh, I can make so many cute levels with this, with some additional mechanics, to make the player think. I can make some really cool things with it."
No, I mean, it sounds like it was a nifty little respite from the larger projects.
Absolutely, yeah. It was, like a very creatively stimulating chunk of time that I invested, and then I, came back to my big projects like refreshed and ready to go again into the AAA stuff. Like AAA, when I say AAA, it's not that my games are AAA. I'm referring to Unreal Engine and all that, 3D graphics, super high detailed models and characters and everything.
Of course. And like, do you use Unreal Engine for all your big projects?
Lately, yeah, the last two big games that I worked on, so Last Days of Lazarus and The Crimson Maid, are made in Unreal, and I also have something that I haven't announced yet, that it's still early in development, that's again also made in Unreal. Yeah. Prior to that, I was using Unity, but then Unity got a little weird with some stuff, and I decided it's not a good investment to develop all my frameworks there. And that was prior to their really big mess that they made.
The other weird thing they did.
Oh yeah, so like one of the things that kind of put me away from them was that they decided you needed a pro subscription to be able to release on consoles, and that was like, that's not okay. I can't pay $2,000 per year on Unity. As amazing as it is, I'm not generating enough revenue to take that big hit of of cost.
And how does Unreal Engine? Are you using the latest iteration of Unreal Engine?
Yeah, we're using. Well, currently we're on Unreal Engine 5.1, but yeah, it's Unreal Engine 5 for sure. We're not upgrading immediately as the new versions, like the minor versions come, but yeah, basically we're on the latest version, more or less.
Fair enough. And how does that compare to Unity?
Oh, it's quite different, it's quite different. I was lucky enough that on the company that I was telling you about in our last year, we actually worked on a game in Unreal Engine, so I had some experience, and I already had gotten used to the Unreal way of thinking. Yeah, it's a bit different. There are definitely things that are much better. There are definitely things that I don't really enjoy. Like for me, I loved C# in Unity. That I had immense power with C#. With C++, it's very icky for me, and I kind of prefer using blueprints as much as I can. Well, again, this is a bit of technical stuff. I don't know if it makes sense for anyone.
It's, I think, basic enough to get the point across. At any rate, now it also looks like you serve as a publisher at times, because you've got like what is this, Cake Laboratory?
Yeah, Cake Laboratory and Rolling Eggs. Though after I released Elena Temple on Switch, Um, I went around to various game development conferences, both here in the country and outside. And I got talking to another tiny studio from Romania, from Bucharest, and they had Cake Laboratory. They already had it developed, and I asked them, why don't you put this on Switch? This looks like something that could do really well on Switch. They had it for mobile, and they were like, well, we don't have the dev kit, we don't have the experience, we don't have the time. And I said, well, okay, I can make that for you. I can publish it for you. And, I take a cut and I handle all the porting. And they were like, okay, let's do that. And it turned out to be a really good idea. That game did really well on Switch. And then they said, I was like, okay, sure, why not? Unfortunately, the second one didn't do as well, not nearly as well. And that was kind of it. After that, they kind of focused on their own things. They didn't make another game after that. And then, like sometime later, the developer from Darkania Works, George from Darkania Works, because again he's one man studio. He was working on Last Days of Lazarus. He had like maybe 2 chapters from the game, and he showed it to me. And as I had experience with publishing and porting and all that, I said, maybe we can work together. Let's see if you can push this further. Let's see if you can make more content, bring it closer to final product. And then if everything looks well, I can port it for you, even if it was in Unreal and I was used to Unity. It didn't matter. I have enough confidence in my coding skills that I can port from an engine. So he did that, but sometime along the way, we kept meeting and I kept giving him feedback. And at some point we said, you know what, why don't we finish this game together? Let's just take it from the top. Let's polish everything. Let's change everything that doesn't make sense. Let's just make sure this is as stable and as nice product as we can make together. It's definitely going to be better than what either of us can make alone. So that was the beginning of our more close collaboration. We co-developed the game, we released it, and now we're making the second game, which is the Crimson Maid.
So is Crimson Maid like a collaboration from the get-go?
Yeah, this time, yeah, we started from scratch. We came up with the story together. We each played to our strength. George made this amazing visuals as always. Characters. I made some characters too. We wrote the story together. We designed the game together. Each of us tried to bring as much of our experience as possible into the game, and I think it's definitely looking in a much better place than Lazarus was, especially because we kind of thought as much as possible of everything from the start. Like, we have a game design document with all the mechanics, with all the story, with all the outlines, with all the quests in the game and everything, and we kind of have like the pillars of the game very well defined from the get-go.
I mean, that sounds valuable, especially in comparison. Like, did anything go wrong on the Last Days of Lazarus?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we managed to make a game that we were both proud of, for sure. But the fact that we hadn't started together from the start led to a lot of extra development time, because we had situations where we needed to scratch things, we needed to re-implement stuff, we needed to rethink some systems that weren't in there, because George doesn't have much experience coding, so not everything that was in there was actually functional when you started to pull it. So yeah, it just led to increased development time. This time it should be a much smoother process.
I mean, you mentioned that you've been working on this project for 9 months, so that is a fairly significant chunk of time. Would you say it's been going smoother than Last Days?
Yeah, well, consider that George had been working for at least a year and a half before I joined the project. So he had in total about 3 years on Last Days of Lazarus, and I joined him for the last year and a half. So that was like in total a 3 years game. This one we're really hoping to get it done in 2 years, hopefully 2 years and something maybe. But it's a different game. It's got more. It has more systems. It's like a bit more gamey. Yeah, it's a bit different. I don't know in terms of scope if it's bigger or not, but it's definitely it has a different feel to it.
And I suppose we should get into the actual game itself. What is the Crimson Maid?
So the Crimson Maid, like the most important thing about it is that it's an adventure game, right? So it's a classical adventure game. You explore, you solve life puzzles, you talk to people. If we're thinking like the elevator pitch, the Crimson Maid is a period drama adventure game that blends romance with murder mystery and a dash of supernatural. Um, so in the Crimson Maid, you play as Maris, who is a priest in training, and he had left home like a couple years prior to the events in the game to become a priest. His family didn't approve, so their relationship was pretty strained. But then his father got inexplicably sick, and he rushes back home to be by his side and to try to understand what's going on. But as he will try to solve this mystery, um, his attention will be diverted. He'll be distracted by this really beautiful maid that now works for his family, which is the Crimson Maid. Her name is Irina. So the game will be like about their blossoming romance, at the same time about trying to solve the mystery of what's going on with your father, and then things will start to escalate. It's like there's gonna be murder, there's gonna be investigation into what's going on, there's gonna be the goal of trying to piece everything together and try to understand what's happening and to see if there is a way how to save anyone.
It sounds intriguing. And so when you say this is a classic adventure game, so you mean like the point and click type affair that you'd find in the 90s?
Yeah, something like that, but without the visual style of a point and click game. So this is a first person, fully explorable game. You explore the mansion of the family, this big mansion with its surroundings and the servant's house and like a little forest area around it, the cemetery, the family crypt, and all that. So there's going to be a lot of exploring. Like I said, you're going to find items, you're going to solve puzzles, you're going to find collectibles, you're going to find optional documents to read. But like the main focus of the game will be on dialogues. You're going to have a lot of talking to do with the people inhabiting the mansion. And there's going to be plenty of optional topics. Like you don't have to go through them, but if you really want to get to the depth of the story and to connect with these characters, you're going to want to learn more about them and what they think, and try to see who's lying, who's telling the truth.
Yeah, that is some classic, maybe not as conventional as some adventure games, but there are plenty of adventure games out there that do this kind of thing. And how do you come up with conversations and puzzles and all of the adventure gamey stuff?
Well, you just create them. Like you kind of this is something actually, at least on the story side, this is something that both George and myself are pretty good at. I mean, we have like this really rich imagination, and coming up with dialogues is definitely something that we don't have any difficulties to do. Also, in terms of game design, this is like my strength. I did game design for like almost my entire game development career. Yeah, it's not a problem for us. And then, of course, you don't just sit and come up with ideas. You have a structure, right? So you have a plot, you have character arcs, you have like mood boards for the player. I mean, you are always in pursuit of some goals. So it's much easier to write those dialogues or to come up with those quests when you know what you want, both do you want the story to go, where do you want the characters to go, what do you want them to feel, what do you want the player to feel. So yeah.
Interesting. And how does the actual collaborative process work? Like, do you two get together since you're in the same city?
Yeah, definitely. We meet at least once a week. We have calls like every day. And like for example, the first part where we came up with like the initial plot of the story, as I was focused on creating a framework, the like game mechanics framework for the game. Um, George, who is really good with coming up with these insane plots with twists and stuff, I told him, you just think of a plot, I'll focus on the mechanics, and then when you have a basic idea of the plot, we just sit together for 1, 2, 3 weeks, doesn't matter how much is needed, and we polish it and we, remove the stuff that doesn't make sense, put new ideas, better ideas in there if necessary, and then we have like the core plot structure. And once we had that, I took it and I made a big game design document with everything that I like, the main events and everything that I wanted to happen throughout the game. And after we had that and we started properly implementing the game and going into production, then I write the dialogues for each of the characters, and then we get together, we go through all the dialogues that I've written, again, come up with better ideas, rewrite stuff as necessary. And, it's a very iterative process, trying to get to the best result possible, trying to not have loopholes, to not have things that don't make sense, to not bore the player too much. This is one of the main pillars for us. It's don't have fluff dialogue. I mean, this is something that we really both hate in games. So if you play like a RPG, oh man, if you play a JRPG, like 99% of that dialogue is just, it shouldn't be there, right? It's just like, oh, the birds are so pretty. Yeah, I love birds. Oh, cool. That's amazing. So we're trying to, like, even if you have a topic about birds, you try to use that, what seemingly looks like a fluff topic, you use that to reveal something about one of the two characters talking, right? So if you say, hey, do you like birds? Like, the answer should be something like, I used to love them, but my dad made me kill one of them when I was a kid. And then you use like a very fluff topic to reveal something about the character, to reveal some sort of trauma, to reveal kind of an explanation to why he may be the way he is.
Okay. And it sounds like you do have a handle on that, or your partner does, at the very least. So, at what stage of development would you say a Crimson Maid is at this point in time?
So it's definitely in production. We have about, like, in actual polished content, finished content, which is the content that you see in the demo that's available on Steam, we have, I think, about 15 to 20% of the game done. But if you look at the big picture, all the underlying systems are there, or the game mechanics are functional, and they just need content attached to them. Everything about the core structure of the game is done. The characters are all done. We just need a couple of outfits for them, but the rest of the things are done. Like most of the environments in the game are already done. So we're definitely at more than 20% of the game done. I'd say we're probably at around 40% or something like that.
And indeed, I think you put out a demo for the Steam Next Fest.
No, it wasn't in the Next Fest. It was just a demo. The common knowledge for us indies is to keep your participation in the Steam Next Fest as close to the release date as possible. So we're gonna be part of the Steam Next Fest that is closest to when we're ready to release.
Fair.
But we wanted to have the demo available as early as possible because we wanted people to have a chance to try it, to decide if it's for them, to wishlist the game. So this also helps us get a bit of an idea of how the game might do. So if you have like 10,000 wishlists, that's a very good start. If you have 200 wishlists, well, that's not that great. So you're trying to minimize your losses, right?
And is demo still up?
Sorry?
Is this demo available?
Yeah, it's gonna be available. We're probably gonna leave it available for players right up until release, and it's very likely that when we do get into that Steam Next Fest, we'll update the demo with probably a bit of extra content, maybe another chapter or two.
And from what I can see here, you are developing the game for not just the PC, but for the PlayStation and Xbox families.
Yeah.
Is that being done simultaneously, or are you just like working on the PC version and the console versions will come later?
They're pretty much at the same time with the things that will be done right before release, right? There will be things that are specific to the platforms. Like we're gonna have an achievement system, and then we're gonna have achievements for Steam, for Xbox, for PlayStation, right? And the framework that I was telling you about already supports porting to those platforms because we had experience making games for Xbox and PlayStation already, because Last Days of Lazarus was also available on those two platforms. So it's pretty much at the same time, with some, like the final month, we'll have some dedicated time to each console individually to see if we need to do something super specific to that console. But like the platforms are quite similar. Once you know how to port to them, they're quite similar in terms of like the gameplay and the core and everything.
Right. And have you sorted out pricing on the Crimson Maid yet?
Not yet, no. we really need to see how long, especially how long the game will be, like how much content there will be, because we have an idea, but we don't really have an idea of how much time it will take the player to actually finish it.
Right. And I suppose, finally, is there anything you can say on your next project at this point?
Yeah, I guess I can say, so while my focus is definitely on the Crimson Maid, there is this tiny thing called a budget that we need to sort out because the game will cost us a good deal of money to produce. So we have kind of two avenues to approach this. Either we're gonna get some funding, maybe a publisher, if someone would be interested and the deal will make sense for us. Either we'll need to try to come up with some extra funds. And if it's the same second option, well, George already has announced his game, which is called What Have You Done, Father, which is something relatively similar to Last Days of Lazarus in terms of gameplay and feel. It's got this horror vibe. It's also an adventure game, right? But more close, like in gameplay, to how Last Days of Lazarus was. And then I am working on some sort of 3D visual novel game that I haven't yet announced. But if it will be necessary if we need to generate some funds, we're going to focus on these smaller projects to make them first, so they can generate a little more revenue, so we can push that final development stretch of the Crimson Maid. But again, that depends a lot on what we do with funding.
Indeed. Well, I think I've run through my gamut of questions. Anything further from you guys?
I believe I'm good.
I think you've asked everything I was going to.
Well, Catalin, it was wonderful having you on the program to talk about your projects. What you've shown us here today certainly looks interesting, and I look forward to seeing how the Crimson Maid shapes up over the next, let's say, year and a half, 2 years.
Thank you, and it was really, really fun being a part of this. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting couple of next years for us as a team, and both for me as a studio. It's gonna be exciting.
Sounds like it. Right. So yeah, the game is The Crimson Maid. It's currently in development, and you can go wish listed on Steam right now, and keep an eye out on developments there.
And play the demo.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in actually later on today, as Petty Fan still needs to make up his review for this week with colored effects. So until then, I shall wish you good gaming.